My name is Rosa Maria Hernandez. I am 53 years old, and I have been waiting 10 years for my life to make sense again. I am sitting here in my small kitchen in Guadalajara, the same one where I made breakfast for my husband the morning he left for the United States, promising me he would return soon. The clock on the wall ticks away, knowing all my secrets, marking every second of these 10 years that have passed like an eternity. The afternoon light filters through the window with yellow curtains that have lost their bright color, just like my hopes. I can hear the children playing in the street, their laughter mingling with the sound of passing cars and the cry of the corn vendor who arrives every afternoon at 5 o'clock. The aroma of the coffee I just made mixes with the smell of dampness that always fills this house, especially at this time of year when it rains so much. My hands, wrinkled from work and worry, hold a letter that arrived a week ago. It's from Miguel, my husband. After so many months without any direct news, only brief phone calls and increasingly scarce money transfers, he finally wrote. But his words did not bring the joy I had hoped for. Rosa, the letter said in his handwriting, which I no longer recognize. I have decided that it is time for us to talk honestly. When I return next month, we need to discuss our future. We have both changed a lot. We are very different people now. My heart sank so low when I read those words that I had to sit down. Very different people? How could he say that? I'm the same Rosa who married him 25 years ago, the same one who gave him 3 children, the same one who sold everything we had so he could take that trip that was going to save us. But as I look around this kitchen, as I feel the weight of the silence that fills every corner of this house, I begin to wonder if maybe he's right. The ancient refrigerator makes that noise it always makes when it's about to give up, as if it's tired of working. It reminds me of myself. On the table are photos of our children. Carmen, 23, who is married and lives in Monterrey. Jose Luis, 21, who is studying at university. And my baby, Sophia, 18, who just finished high school. They too have changed so much in these 10 years. They grew up without their father, and I had to be both mother and father. Tears begin to roll down my cheeks, but they are no longer tears of simple sadness. They are the tears of a woman who is beginning to wake up from a very long dream, from a weight that perhaps should never have existed. Because the truth is that while Miguel was out there finding himself or becoming a different person, I also changed. I became a strong, independent woman who learned to fix broken pipes, negotiate with lenders, and comfort her children when they asked why their father wasn't coming to their graduations. The bells of San Miguel Church ring at 6 in the afternoon, and like every day at this time for the past 10 years, I close my eyes and remember. I remember the day it all began, when Miguel came home with that expression I knew so well, that defeated look I had seen so many times when things got tough. I was born in a small town called San Juan de los Lagos, in Jalisco, in an adobe house with a dirt floor that always smelled of hot comal and herbs. It was 1971, and Mexico was a very different country than it is now. My mother, Esperanza, was a small woman, but strong as an ox, with hands rough from work and a voice that could be heard from the kitchen to the end of the street when she called us to dinner. My father, Don Roberto, worked in the fields from before sunrise until the sun disappeared from the horizon. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, we all listened. He had those huge, dark hands that smelled of damp earth and honest sweat. He always said, "Mija, in this life, the only things that are worthwhile are hard work and family. Everything else is bullshit." I grew up surrounded by the smell of boiled beans, freshly made tortillas, and the incense my mother burned every night in front of the image of the Virgin of Guadalupe that hung in the living room. It was a small house, only 3 rooms, but it was always full of life. My brothers, 4 boys and me, the only girl, ran around making noise from early in the morning. The sound of our laughter mixed with the clucking of the chickens in the yard and the barking of Sultan, our yellow dog who always seemed to be smiling. Mornings in my house began at 5 o'clock, when my mother got up to light the fire to make coffee. The smell of coffee with cinnamon and brown sugar was what woke us all up. Then came the sound of the metate grinding chilies for the salsa, and then the rhythmic clapping of the tortillas that my mother made so perfectly that they looked like they had been made by an angel. I especially remember Sundays after Mass, when the whole family would sit around the wooden table my father had made with his own hands. We ate red pozole that my mother had prepared on Saturday, and my father told us stories about when he was young, how he had met my mother at a fair in the neighboring town, how he had had to ask for her hand 3 times before my grandfather gave him permission to marry her. But it wasn't all happy times. Money was always tight in our house. I remember the nights when my parents would talk quietly in the kitchen, thinking we were asleep, but I could hear them arguing about how they were going to pay for this or that. My mother would cry silently while she washed the dishes, and my father would smoke his only cigarette of the day, staring at the ceiling as if the answers were going to appear there in writing. When I turned 15, instead of having a big party like the other girls in town, we had to settle for a small family gathering. My mother made me a pink dress out of fabric she had bought at the market in Guadalajara, but she didn't have enough for matching shoes. I didn't care, because seeing the happiness in my parents' eyes when they saw me dressed up was worth more than any expensive shoes. It was at that party that I met Miguel. He was 18, tall and dark, with green eyes that sparkled when he smiled. He worked at his uncle's mechanic shop in the neighboring town, and his hands were always stained with grease and smelled of motor oil and honest work. When he asked me to dance that night, with the music of the trio my father had hired playing in the background, I knew my life was about to change forever. Miguel was different from the other boys in town. He talked about dreams, plans, everything we were going to achieve together. He told me we weren't going to be poor all our lives, that he had plans for us to be happy and prosperous. His kisses tasted of youth and promises, and when he held me in his arms, I felt like the whole world could fit there. We got married when I was 18, in the Church of San Juan, with a simple but loving ceremony. My wedding dress was the same one my mother had worn, altered by the village seamstress to fit me. Miguel looked so handsome in his borrowed suit, his hair slicked back with gel, that all the girls in town sighed when he entered the church. The honeymoon was one night in a modest hotel in Guadalajara, our first trip together outside the village. I remember we were so nervous that we laughed more than we talked. But when we were finally together as husband and wife, I felt like I had found my place in the world. Miguel whispered in my ear that he loved me, that we were going to be happy forever, that our children would never go through the hardships we had gone through. We started our married life in a small house we rented for 300 pesos a month, near the workshop where Miguel worked. It was tiny, just one large room that served as a living room, dining room, and bedroom, and a tiny kitchen with a bathroom we shared with the neighbors. But it was ours, and I fixed it up with so much love that it looked like a palace. I hung curtains that I sewed with my own hands, put up paper flowers that I made in the afternoons, and always kept everything so clean that you could eat off the floor. The first years of marriage were like a beautiful dream. Miguel worked from sunrise to sunset in the workshop, coming home with his hands black with grease, but with a smile that lit up the whole house. I worked in a clothing store downtown, earning just enough to help with the expenses, but we were happy. In the evenings, we would sit in the only chair we had, him reading the newspaper and me sewing or embroidering, and we would plan our future. "Rosa," he would say as he stroked my hair, "someday we'll have our own house, with a garden and everything. And our children will go to college. They'll be somebody in life." I believed every word he said, because in those days, Miguel was like a magician who could make any dream seem possible. Our first son, Jose Luis, was born on a Tuesday in February, after 20 hours of labor at the civil hospital. Miguel was so nervous that he fainted when the doctor told him he could go in to meet his son. When he finally held our baby in his huge hands, trembling with emotion, he cried like a child. "He's perfect, Rosa," he kept saying to me. "He's perfect, just like his mother." With the arrival of Jose Luis, everything changed. Expenses increased, and Miguel's salary at the workshop was no longer enough. I had to quit my job to take care of the baby, and we began to live on the bare minimum. Dinners became simpler, outings almost disappeared, and the nights were filled with the baby's crying and our whispered worries. 2 years later, Carmen arrived, our little princess with big eyes and a mischievous smile. This time the birth was easier, but the financial situation had worsened. Miguel had lost his job at the workshop when the business went bankrupt, and he was working as a bricklayer, earning per day what he used to earn per week. I remember the nights when Miguel came home so tired he could barely walk. His hands, once soft and well-groomed, were covered in calluses and cuts. His back hurt so much that he moaned when he laid down, but he never complained. "It's temporary, Rosa," he always told me. "Things will get better soon." But things didn't get better. Every month was a struggle to pay the rent, buy food, and keep the children clothed and clean. I went back to work, this time cleaning houses for wealthy families in Las Lomas, earning a pittance but helping us survive. I left the house at 5 in the morning and returned at 6 in the evening, exhausted but pretending to be happy so as not to worry the children. It was during those difficult years that Sophia, our youngest child, was born. She arrived at a time when we couldn't even afford diapers. But she was welcomed with the same love as her siblings. Miguel would carry her every night when he came home from work, singing Pedro Infante songs to her with that hoarse voice he had after spending all day shouting orders on the construction site. The children grew, and with them grew our needs and our debts. Jose Luis needed school supplies. Carmen needed new shoes because she had grown. Sophia needed medicine because she was often sick. Miguel started working on weekends too. And I took a second job sewing at night for a factory that paid by the piece. Our conversations became all about money, about debts, about how we were going to make it to the end of the month. The romance of the early years was lost amid unpaid bills and clothes hanging all over the house. Miguel and I went to bed so tired that we barely said good night, and we got up so early that there was no time even for a cup of coffee together. That's when Miguel started talking about the opportunity. He had a cousin, Raul, who had gone to work in the United States 5 years earlier and was sending so much money home that his family had been able to buy a new house and start a business. "Rosa," Miguel would say to me with a look that no longer sparkled as it once had, "Raul says that over there you can earn in a week what we earn here in a month. He says there's a lot of work, that people like us can get ahead." At first, I didn't pay any attention to him. I thought it was just another fantasy, like all the others we'd had throughout our marriage. But Miguel started talking about it every day. He showed me the letters Raul wrote to him, telling him about his job in a factory in Los Angeles, about the apartment he had rented, about all the money he was saving to return to Mexico and start a business. "It's just for a while, Rosa," he repeated over and over again. 2 years, 3 at most. I'll save up enough money and come back. We'll buy a little house of our own, start a business, and we'll never have to worry again. I resisted the idea. How could we separate our family? How was I going to raise 3 children alone? What guarantee did we have that Miguel would return? I had heard stories of men who went north and were never heard from again, who forgot their families and made new lives there. But the situation was becoming increasingly desperate. One day Sofia fell ill, and we had to take her to the hospital. The bill came to 8,000 pesos, which we didn't have. We had to borrow money, pawn the television, and sell the only gold ring Miguel had given me when we got married. That night, watching my baby in the hospital bed, pale and feverish, Miguel took my hand and said, "Rosa, I can't keep watching my children suffer. I can't keep feeling like a failure who can't support his family." It was an April night, after the children had gone to sleep, when Miguel and I had the conversation that would change our lives forever. We had received another letter from Don Aurelio, the landlord, threatening to evict us if we didn't pay the 3 months' rent we owed. The electricity had already been cut off once, and they had only turned it back on because Miguel promised the utility company worker he would pay him on Friday. Miguel was sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands, surrounded by bills and unpaid receipts. I was washing the dinner dishes in a basin because they had also cut off our water for non-payment. The silence was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. "Rosa," he finally said, in a voice I didn't recognize, "I don't think we have a choice anymore. We have to seriously consider moving to the United States." I dried my hands on my apron and sat down across from him. His eyes, which had once sparkled with dreams and hopes, now looked dull and defeated. I took his hands, those hard-working hands I loved so much, and felt how rough and hurt they were. "Miguel," I said, "you know I don't like the idea of you leaving. This family needs you here." "What for?" he replied bitterly. "To see me every day as a failure trying to find work? So the children grow up seeing their father unable to provide them with even the basics?" We talked all night. Miguel had been researching, asking around, planning in secret. His cousin Raul had given him the contact information for a trusted coyote who would get him across the border for $3,000, money we could get by selling our few belongings and borrowing from Miguel's brother. "Look, Rosa," he explained, showing me a notebook where he had done some calculations. "If I work in construction over there, I can earn $300 a week. In a month, I earn more than I do here in 4 months. In 2 years, 3 at most, I'll have enough to buy a house here and start a business." I listened to his words, but my heart sank deeper and deeper. On the one hand, I knew he was right. The situation was unsustainable, and with each passing day, we sank deeper into debt. But on the other hand, the idea of being alone with 3 small children, not knowing when or if Miguel would return, terrified me. "What if something happens to you?" I asked with tears in my eyes. "What if they deport you? What if you forget about us?" Miguel hugged me so tightly that it almost hurt. He smelled of sweat and exhaustion, but also of that scent that was uniquely his, which had calmed me ever since we were dating. Rosa Maria, he whispered in my ear. I could never forget you. You are my life, my reason for being. Everything I do there will be with the intention of returning here to you. We spent weeks arguing, fighting, making up, arguing again. The children realized something was wrong, because Jose Luis, who was already 8, asked me one morning, Mommy, why don't you and Daddy laugh like you used to? That's when we decided to talk to the children. We sat the 3 of them on the big bed, and Miguel, with that trembling voice he used when he was very emotional, explained that Daddy was going away to work for a while, but that it was to earn money so we could have a better life. Jose Luis, always the most serious, asked, How long, Dad? Not long, son, Miguel replied. 2 years, maybe 3. When I come back, we'll have our own house with a garden, and you'll be able to go to a private school. Carmen, who was only 6, began to cry. I don't want you to go, Dad. Who's going to help me with my homework? Sophia, who was still too young to understand, just hugged Miguel and said, Dad, don't go. That night was one of the hardest of my life. Miguel and I didn't sleep a wink, hugging each other in that bed that knew all our secrets, all our dreams, all our tears. We talked about everything and nothing, trying to memorize every detail about each other, as if we already knew that when he left, nothing would ever be the same again. Promise me one thing, Rosa, he said as dawn broke. Promise me that you'll take good care of the children, that you'll talk to them about me every day so they won't forget me. I promise, I said. But you promise me that you'll write to me often, that you'll call me, that you won't forget who we are. I promise I'll come back the same man I am. Now, he replied, and sealed his promise with a kiss that tasted of tears and farewell. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparations. Miguel sold his tools, his bicycle, even his guitar, the one he used to play for me when we were dating. I sold my sewing machine, the few pieces of good furniture we had, even my wedding dress. All to raise the $3,000 the coyote was charging. His brother Joaquin lent us another $1,000 so Miguel would have some money for his first few days in the United States. Pay me back when you can, he said, but take good care of my compadre over there. The night before he left, Miguel organized a small farewell dinner. We invited our families and cooked all his favorite foods: mole, tamales, refried beans, horchata. Everyone tried to be cheerful, but you could see the sadness in every forced smile, in every hug that lasted longer than usual. My mother-in-law, Doña Carmen, cried the whole time. Mijo, she said to Miguel, take good care of yourself there. Eat well, dress warmly, and don't forget to pray every night. My father, Don Roberto, shook Miguel's hand and said, take care of your family there, but don't forget the one you're leaving behind. That night, after everyone left, Miguel and I stayed up late, making plans, making promises, trying to convince ourselves that everything would be all right. When I come back, Miguel said to me, we're going to renew our wedding vows. We're going to have a big party like we couldn't when we got married. When you come back, I replied, we'll do everything we haven't been able to do. We'll travel, see new places, and be happy without any worries. Early the next morning, Don Esteban, the coyote, arrived in his battered white pickup truck. He was a small, dark-skinned man with a mustache who spoke very quickly and had a look that didn't inspire much confidence. But Raul had assured us that he was good at his job, that he had gotten many people across without any problems. Miguel already had his suitcase packed, a small canvas bag with just the bare essentials. 3 changes of clothes, a photo of us at our wedding, another of the children, a rosary his mother had given him, and a little notebook with our phone numbers and addresses. The children said goodbye to him at the front door. Jose Luis, trying to be the man of the house, said, "Dad, I'll take care of Mom and my sisters." Carmen couldn't stop crying and hugging him. Sophia, who barely understood what was happening, just kept repeating, "Goodbye, Dad, goodbye." When it was my turn to say goodbye, I felt like the world was falling apart. We hugged each other so tightly that I thought we would never let go. Miguel smelled like the lotion he had put on, especially for the trip, mixed with the scent of the house, of us, of our whole life together. "I love you, Rosa Maria," he whispered in my ear. "You are the most important thing in my life. Everything I do there will be for you, for us." "I love you too, Miguel Angel," I replied, "and I'll be here waiting for you. Always." The last kiss was long and desperate, as if we wanted to hold on to all the love we wouldn't be able to give each other while he was away. His lips tasted of promises and fear, of hope and farewell. We watched the truck drive away until it disappeared around the corner. The children and I stood at the door, motionless, as if we couldn't believe he was really gone. The silence that followed was deafening, filled with all the words we hadn't said, all the kisses we hadn't given, all the dreams we had put into that trip. That night, for the first time in 12 years of marriage, I slept alone in our bed. Miguel's side still smelled like him, and I hugged his pillow all night, crying silently so the children wouldn't hear me. That was the beginning of the longest days of my life, days of waiting that turned into months and then into years. The first days without him, the first week after Miguel left, was like living in a movie in slow motion. Everything felt strange, out of place, as if the house itself knew that someone important was missing. The alarm clock rang at 5 in the morning, as usual, but there was no longer any need to make coffee for 2, iron a work shirt, or pack a lunch. The children also felt the change immediately. Jose Luis, trying to be brave, got up earlier and helped me dress his sisters for school. Carmen asked every night when Dad was going to call, and Sophia searched all over the house asking, "Where's Daddy?" I tried to keep the routine normal, but it was impossible. The breakfast table looked empty without Miguel reading the newspaper and commenting on the news. The nights were the worst. When after putting the children to bed, I was left alone in the living room, listening to the ticking of the clock and waiting for sounds that no longer came. The keys in the door, the heavy footsteps in the hallway, Miguel's voice asking what was for dinner. The first Sunday was especially difficult. It was the day we always went to Mass together, then bought sweet bread at Don Chema's bakery, and spent the afternoon at the park watching the children play. That Sunday, the children and I went to Mass alone. And throughout the ceremony, I couldn't stop looking at the empty place where Miguel always sat. After Mass, Mrs. Esperanza, our neighbor, came over to ask how we were doing. She was an elderly widow who had always been very kind to us. "Rosa," she said, "if you need anything, don't hesitate to ask me." I know how hard it is to be alone with children. Her words touched my heart, but they also made me realize something I hadn't wanted to accept. I was now a woman on my own. In the village, single women were viewed with a mixture of pity and suspicion. Some people would assume that Miguel had abandoned us. Others would start making up gossip about why he had really left. Miguel's first call came 5 days later. It was a Tuesday night, and I was giving Sophia a bath when the phone rang. I ran to answer it with wet hands, and my heart beating so fast it felt like it was going to jump out of my chest. "Rosa?" I heard his voice distorted by the distance and the poor connection. "It's me, my love." "Miguel!" I shouted, and immediately the children came running into the kitchen. "How are you? Did you get there okay? Where are you?" "I'm fine, my love," he said. And although he tried to sound cheerful, I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. "I'm in Los Angeles now. It was difficult, but it's over. I'm at Raul's house, and tomorrow we're going to look for work." The children shouted, "Dad, Dad," and wanted to talk to him. Jose Luis was the first. "Dad, when are you coming back? Mom is sad, but she says you're working to buy us a house." "That's right, son," Miguel replied. "Daddy is working so you can have a nice house. Be good and take care of your mom and sisters." Carmen told him about school, about how she had gotten an A in math, about how she missed him reading her stories before bed. Sophia just said, "Dad, Dad," and blew kisses into the phone. When it was my turn to speak again, the call was almost over. "Miguel," I said quickly, "I love you very much. Take care of yourself and call soon." "I love you too, Rosa. Give the kids a kiss for me. I'll call on Sunday." When I hung up the phone, I realized I was crying. But they were tears of relief, of knowing he had arrived safely, of hearing his voice. The children were excited, and that night they fell asleep more peacefully, knowing that their dad was okay. But after that first call, the real waiting began. The days seemed endless, especially on Sundays, when we waited for his call. Sometimes he called, sometimes he didn't, depending on whether he had found work that week, whether he had money for calls, whether he had found a phone. I started working longer hours to make up for Miguel's lost wages. In addition to cleaning houses in the mornings, I began washing and ironing clothes in the afternoons. My hands, which had once been soft, became rough and cracked from the soap and bleach. But I needed the money, not only for daily expenses, but to pay off the debts we had left behind. The nights were long and lonely. After putting the children to bed, I stayed up late sewing, mending clothes that people brought me, doing embroidery work that a woman downtown had found for me. The silent house was filled only with the noise of the sewing machine and my thoughts. I thought about Miguel, trying to imagine what his new life was like. Where did he sleep? What did he eat? Did he have friends? Did he feel as lonely as I did? The letters he sent me at first were long and detailed, telling me about his construction job, about the house where he lived with other Mexican workers, about how different everything was in the United States. "Rosa," he wrote in a letter that I still have today, "everything here is very big and very fast. The buildings are huge, the cars are brand new. People walk as if they are always in a hurry. I work from 6 in the morning until 6 in the evening, carrying materials, mixing cement, doing whatever is necessary. It's hard work, but they pay well. I already sent $300 with Raul for you to exchange and use for household expenses. Those first money transfers were a blessing. I could pay the rent on time, buy food without having to count every peso, and even buy new shoes for the children when they needed them. But they were also a constant reminder that Miguel was far away, that this money came from the sacrifice of being apart. The neighbors started treating me differently. Some with more respect because they knew Miguel was working in the United States and that things were going better for us financially. others with a certain distance, as if my new situation made them uncomfortable. The ladies at the market constantly asked me about Miguel, when he was coming back, if he had his papers yet, if it was true that he was making a lot of money there. José Luis began to act like the man of the house. At 8 years old, my little boy had matured suddenly. He helped me with his sisters, carried the grocery bags, and even tried to fix the bathroom faucet when it broke. "Mom," he would say with a seriousness that was not typical of his age, "Dad told me to take care of the house, and that's what I'm going to do." Carmen developed a dependence on me that she hadn't had before. She wouldn't leave my side when I was home. She slept with me at night when she had nightmares. And at school, she told everyone that her dad was the bravest man in the world because he had gone to the United States to work. Sophia suffered the most, although she was too young to express it. She had started to speak very well before Miguel left, but after his departure, she became quieter. Sometimes I would find her standing in front of the door, as if waiting for him to arrive. Sundays became sacred days because that was when Miguel called. The whole week revolved around that call. The children counted the days. I mentally prepared everything I wanted to tell him. And when the phone finally rang, it was as if for a few minutes our family was complete again. But there were also Sundays when he didn't call, and those were the worst. We waited from early in the morning. The children didn't want to leave the house in case he called. I couldn't concentrate on anything. When night came and the phone hadn't rung, the children went to bed sad, and I stayed awake wondering what had happened. A month after he left, Miguel sent me his first photo. It was a Polaroid of him standing in front of a very tall building, smiling but with sad eyes. He looked thinner, and even though he was smiling, I could see that it wasn't the same smile as before. The children stuck it on the refrigerator and kissed it every night before going to sleep. "Look, Mommy," Carmen would say to me, "Daddy looks very handsome. But why are his eyes sad?" I didn't know how to answer her, because I had also noticed that sadness in his eyes, the same sadness I was beginning to see in mine when I looked in the mirror. It was during those first few months that I began to understand that the separation wasn't just going to be a difficult period that we would get through when Miguel came back. It was something that was changing all of us, day by day, in ways we couldn't even imagine. After the first few months of adjustment, life began to take on a new rhythm. It was a different rhythm than when Miguel was with us, but it was our rhythm, and little by little we got used to it. The mornings no longer felt so empty, because I had developed new routines that filled the spaces my husband had previously occupied. I got up at 5:30, half an hour later than before, because I no longer had to make Miguel's breakfast or iron his work clothes. I made coffee just for myself, a strong, bitter coffee that gave me the energy to face the day. While it was heating up, I opened the windows to let in the fresh morning air and the singing of the birds nesting in the mango tree in the yard. The children had become more independent out of necessity. José Luis, who was now 9, got up on his own and helped dress Sophia while I made breakfast. Carmen combed her own hair and knew how to pack her school bag. It was as if we had all grown up a little faster than we should have. Afternoons were my most productive time. After picking up the children from school and feeding them, I sat them down at the kitchen table to do their homework while I worked on my sewing. I had gotten more clients, ladies from the neighborhood who brought me dresses to alter, pants to hem, shirts to mend. My hands had become expert at needlework, and I could sew practically without looking, while chatting with the kids about their day at school. "Mommy," Carmen told me as she did her math homework, "today the teacher asked us what our dads do for a living, and I told her that my dad works in the United States building big houses." And what did the teacher say? I asked her as I darned some socks. She said your dad is very brave, and that he'll probably come back soon with lots of money to buy them a nice house. These conversations had become commonplace. The children had learned to talk about their dad in the present tense, as if he were here but simply at work. It was their way of keeping him close, of making his absence less painful. Miguel's money transfers arrived every month, sometimes every 2 months, depending on how well he had done at work. At first he sent $300 or $400, but after a few months he started sending $500, sometimes even $600. It was more money than we had ever seen together in our entire married life. With that money, I was able to do things that were previously unthinkable. I bought a small, used television so the children could watch cartoons on weekends. I had the roof of the house repaired, which leaked every time it rained. I was even able to open a savings account at the bank, something that had always been an unattainable dream. But the money also brought new responsibilities. It was up to me to decide how to spend it, how to manage it, how to make it last. Miguel would call me and ask me what I had spent it on, and I would give him a detailed account of every peso. But the responsibility for the daily decisions was entirely mine. "Rosa," Miguel would say to me on one of his Sunday calls, "do you think it's a good idea to buy that land that Don Aurelio is selling? With what I've saved up so far, we can afford the down payment." "I don't know, Miguel," I would reply. "I'd have to go see it, ask about the conditions, talk to the bank about the loan." "What do you think?" "It's hard to know from here," he would reply, frustration in his voice. "You're there. You can see things. You decide what you think is best." Those conversations became more and more frequent. Miguel consulted me about important decisions, but in the end, the responsibility to act was mine. Without realizing it, I was becoming the head of the family, the one who made the decisions, managed the money, and planned for the future. The children also began to turn to me for everything. Jose Luis no longer said, "When Dad comes home, I'll ask him." But, "Mommy, what do you think?" Carmen no longer waited for Miguel to help her with difficult tasks, but came to me instead. Even Sophia, who at first constantly asked for her dad, had accepted that Mommy was the one who was there for everything. The evenings had become my personal time. After putting the children to bed, when the house was finally quiet, I would sit at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea and write letters to Miguel. I told him about my day, about the children, about the changes in the neighborhood, about my feelings. "My dear Miguel," I wrote in a letter I sent 6 months after he left. "Today, Jose Luis got first place in math in his class. He's growing so fast that all his pants are too small for him now. Carmen learned to braid her hair by herself, and she's so proud that she gets up an hour earlier to do her hair nicely. Sophia is already saying complete sentences, and yesterday she said to me, 'Mommy, when Daddy comes home, I'm going to teach him how to jump rope.' I'm doing well," the letter continued. "Every day I feel stronger, more capable of handling everything that comes my way. Sometimes I surprise myself with everything I can do when I have to. But I miss you so much, especially at night, when the house is quiet and I think about all the plans we had together." Miguel's letters had also changed. At first they were long, full of details about his new life, the people he met, the places he saw. But little by little they became shorter, more focused on work and the money he was saving. "Rosa," he wrote in a letter I received 8 months later, "work is going very well. They gave me a raise because I learned how to operate a new machine. I'm now living with 3 roommates in a bigger apartment, and we each pay $100 a month in rent. Food here is very expensive, but I've learned to cook a few basic things. I'm sending you $600 this month. I noticed that he didn't talk as much about his feelings, about what he missed, about when he planned to return. It was as if he had fallen into a survival routine where the important thing was to work, save money, and send the monthly report home. Sundays were still sacred for phone calls, but even those had changed. Before, we would talk for half an hour, sometimes longer, regardless of the cost. Now the calls lasted 10 or 15 minutes. Just enough time to talk to each child and me, report any important news, and confirm that we were all okay. "How are you, my love?" Miguel would ask me, but he no longer expected a detailed answer. "Fine, very well," I would reply. The others I had at home, the photos of our wedding and vacations, along with the cross he had worn around his neck since he was a child. The coyote arrived at 5 in the morning in an old, dirty truck that smelled of gasoline and fear. He was a small, dark man with a scar across his left cheek and eyes that had seen too much. His name was Esteban, but everyone called him El Flaco because he was as thin as a wire. "Ready, compadre?" he asked Ramon, without looking at me or the children who had woken up to the sound of the engine. Ramon nodded, but I saw his hands tremble as he loaded his backpack. The 4 of us hugged at the door, the children not fully understanding why their father was leaving so early with a strange man. "Dad, are you going to work?" Sophia asked in that little girl's voice she still had at 3 years old. "Yes, sweetheart," Ramon replied, picking her up and kissing her forehead. "I'm going to work far away to earn money and buy you a nice house." "When will you be back?" asked Miguel, who at 2 years old already knew how to ask the questions that hurt the most. "Soon, son." Daddy will be back soon. But I knew that soon meant years, and years for little children are an eternity where first steps, first words, and first days of school are lost. The last hug between Ramon and me lasted so long that El Flaco coughed to remind us that they had to go. We kissed desperately, trying to put into that kiss all the love we wouldn't be able to give each other in the years to come. "I love you, Carmen Elena," he whispered in my ear. "Take good care of our children. I'll be back, I promise." "I love you too, Ramon. Go with God and come back to us soon." We watched them drive away in that beat-up truck until they disappeared around the bend in the road. The children and I stood at the door, motionless, as if we couldn't believe he was really gone. Ramon told me later, in one of his first letters, about the trip that changed our lives forever. El Flaco took them first to Tijuana, a 2-day trip in that truck that broke down every 3 hours. 12 men traveled crammed in like sardines, with very little water and even less food, stopping only to load gas and let the engine cool down. In Tijuana, they were kept waiting for 3 days in a safe house, an unfinished brick building where they slept on the floor and ate beans with hard tortillas once a day. Ramon shared a room with a boy from Oaxaca who was no more than 18 years old and cried every night because he missed his mother. "Carmen," he wrote in that first letter, "you can't imagine what it's like to be here, waiting, not knowing if we'll be able to cross or if the migra will catch us. Fear is in the air. We're all nervous, but also hopeful because we know that on the other side is the opportunity we came here to find." They crossed at night, walking through the desert for 8 hours under a moon that barely lit the path full of rocks and cacti. Ramon carried a bottle of water that ran out 3 hours into the journey, but El Flaco had warned them that they couldn't stop, that they had to keep walking no matter how tired they were. At 4 in the morning, they reached a highway where a white van with tinted windows was waiting for them. They were crammed in like cattle, 20 people in a space meant for 8, and driven to Los Angeles without stopping except to fill up on gas. When I saw the city lights, he wrote to me, "I thought of you that all this would be worth it if I could find work and send you money so you could live better." Ramon arrived in Los Angeles, knowing no one but Aurelio, the cousin who had left 3 years earlier. Aurelio worked in construction and lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with 5 other Mexicans, each paying $100 a month in rent. The apartment was in an area called Pico Union, full of Latino immigrants who worked at whatever they could find just to survive. The walls were thin, and you could hear everything the neighbors did. The shouting of domestic fights, the crying of babies, the music playing late into the night. Ramon slept on the living room sofa for the first few weeks, an old sagging piece of furniture that smelled of cigarettes and greasy food. He got up at 5 in the morning because the first roommate who left for work needed to use the bathroom. Then he made instant coffee with hot water from the tap and ate a tortilla with refried beans from a can. He got his first job through Aurelio, on a construction site in Beverly Hills where they were building a swimming pool for a house that cost more money than Ramon could imagine. He worked from 6 in the morning until 6 in the evening, carrying materials, mixing cement, digging holes under the Californian sun, which was different from the sun in Mexico. More intense, drier, more relentless. On his first day, he earned $60. More money than he had ever seen in a week in Mexico. That night, he called home from a payphone, spending $5 on a 10-minute call to tell us he had found a job. "Carmen," he said in an excited but tired voice, "you can really make money here. If I work every day, I can send $400 a month home." $400 was like 5,000 Mexican pesos. More than we earned together in Mexico. For the first time since he had left, I felt that perhaps his sacrifice would be worth it. The first few months were hard for Ramon in ways he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just the physical labor, which he was used to, but the constant feeling of being a foreigner, of not understanding the unwritten rules of this very different society. At work, the foreman shouted orders in English that he barely understood. He learned basic construction words: hammer, nails, concrete. But complete conversations slipped through his fingers like water. His Mexican co-workers translated the important things for him, but he felt like a child who needed help with everything. Food was another problem. The only places to eat near the construction site were McDonald's and Taco Bell. Food that was nothing like the flavors of home. Ramon lost 15 pounds in the first 2 months. Not only because of the hard work, but also because he couldn't get used to food that tasted like chemicals and old oil. In the afternoons, when he returned to the apartment, he would sit on the couch writing letters that he sent me once a week. He told me everything. About how cold it was in January, how the gringos drove their cars like crazy, about the police helicopters that flew over the neighborhood every night. "I miss everything about home," he wrote. "I miss the smell of freshly made tortillas. I miss the church bells. I miss the sound of children playing in the street. But most of all, I miss you. Sophia must be talking more now. Miguel must be walking better. It hurts my heart to think of everything I'm missing. The first Christmas we spent apart was the saddest of my life." Ramon had only been away for 11 months, but it felt like years. The children kept asking when their father was coming home for presents, and I didn't know what to tell them. Ramon worked on December 24th and 25th because construction paid double for working on holidays. He called me from a payphone at 10 p.m. on the 24th, when it was 8 p.m. In Los Angeles, to wish us a Merry Christmas. "How are my kids?" he asked. And I could hear he was crying, even though he was trying to hide it. "They're fine," I lied, because Sophia had been asking about him all day, and Miguel had been more restless than usual. "They miss you a lot, but they understand that you're working for us. Tell them that Daddy loves them very much, that I'll be with you again soon." "When, Ramon? When will you be able to come?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line, only the sound of cars passing by on the street in Los Angeles. "I don't know, my love. Everything here is more expensive than I thought. Rent, food, transportation. I'm saving, but not as much as I thought I would be able to." That conversation was the first time I began to suspect that the 2 years we had agreed on weren't going to be enough. The second year was easier in some ways and harder in others. Ramon was speaking better English, had gotten a better paying job at a larger construction company, and had moved into a smaller apartment where he lived with only 2 other Mexicans. But he had also grown accustomed to life there in ways I hadn't anticipated. He wrote me fewer letters, called less often, and when we talked, he seemed to be talking about a life that no longer had anything to do with me. "Carmen," he told me in a phone call during his 3rd year, "I've been offered a permanent job here. With papers and everything, I could bring you over." "Bring us to the United States?" "Yes. The kids could go to school here, have better opportunities." For the first time in 3 years, the idea of being together was real, but also terrifying. Leaving Mexico, leaving our families, starting over in a country where I didn't speak the language, where the kids would have to adapt to a completely different culture. "I don't know, Ramon. I need time to think about it." "Okay, think about it. But Carmen, I don't know when I'll be able to return to Mexico. I have a job here. I can support you here. There, I don't know if I'll find anything that will allow me to give you what you deserve." That conversation changed everything. Suddenly, the temporary separation had become a life decision. Either I went with the children to the United States, or he stayed there indefinitely. After months of thinking, consulting with my family, and crying myself to sleep, trying to decide what was best for the children, I decided we would stay in Mexico. The children were already settled in school. Sophia had just turned 6 and was in 1st grade, and Miguel was 5 and in kindergarten. Uprooting them from everything they knew seemed more traumatic than staying apart. Besides, I was afraid. Afraid of not being able to adapt. Of Ramon being a different person after so many years of living alone. Of the United States changing us in ways we couldn't control. "I'm staying in Mexico with the kids," I told him in a phone call that lasted 2 hours and cost a fortune. "But you come back in 2 years, maximum." "Carmen, no, Ramon. 2 more years. We've already been apart for 3 years. 2 more years and you come back. If not, I'll assume you no longer want to be part of this family." "Of course I want to be part of the family. You're the most important thing in my life." "Then come back in 2 years." "All right. 2 more years and I'll be back." But deep down, I began to suspect that 2 years would turn into 3, then 4, then 5. And I was right. Between the 4th and 7th year of separation, both Ramon and I changed in ways we hadn't anticipated. I became completely independent, making all the decisions about the children, the house, our future. I no longer waited for his calls to decide what to do. I no longer asked his permission to buy things for the house or the children. The children grew up seeing their mother as the only authority figure. Sophia was 10 years old and a mature, responsible girl who helped take care of Miguel when I had to work late. Miguel was 9 and had started asking why his dad couldn't get a job in Mexico like all the other dads. "Mom," he asked me one day after school, "does my dad not love us anymore?" "Of course he loves us, son. He's working for us." But Juan Carlos says his dad also worked in the United States, but he came back. He says that dads who really love their families come back soon. I didn't know how to answer him, because deep down, I was beginning to wonder the same thing. Ramon's calls had become less frequent, first to once a week, then once every 2 weeks. The conversations were shorter, more functional. He asked about the children, told me briefly about his work, and told me how much money he was going to send that month. "When are you coming back?" I always asked him at the end of each call. "Soon, Carmen." Soon. But soon didn't mean anything anymore. In the 8th year of separation, something happened that changed our relationship forever. Ramon didn't call for 3 weeks straight. He didn't send any money. He didn't answer the letters I wrote asking what had happened. I began to imagine the worst. That he had had an accident. That he was in jail. That immigration had deported him and he was on his way back to Mexico. But I also began to imagine other things. That he had met another woman. That he had grown tired of supporting a family from afar. That he had decided to start a new life without us. When he finally called, his explanation was vague and unconvincing. "My phone broke, Carmen. And I had some problems at work." "What kind of problems?" "Nothing important. It's all been taken care of." But I knew he was lying to me. After 8 years of marriage and 7 years of phone conversations, I knew every inflection of his voice. And that was the voice he used when he was hiding something from me. "Ramon, tell me the truth. What happened?" "I'm telling you, nothing, Carmen. Why don't you believe me?" "Because I know you. And I know when you're lying to me." We ended that conversation fighting, something that had never happened in all the years we had been apart. I hung up the phone feeling lonelier than ever, wondering if the man I had just spoken to was really the same man I had known and loved for so many years. The last 2 years of separation were the hardest, but not for the obvious reasons. I had already gotten used to living without Ramon. I had already learned to be a single mother. I had already developed my own routine and my own way of looking at life. The problem was that I had also gotten used to not missing him like I used to. His calls had become part of the routine, like listening to the news or checking the mail. I no longer got excited to hear his voice. I no longer stayed up waiting for him to call. I no longer dreamed of the day he would return. The children had also changed. Sophia was 13 and practically a teenager who had learned not to depend emotionally on a father who was more of an idea than a real presence. Miguel was 12 and barely remembered what it was like to live with Dad at home. "Mom," Sophia said to me one day, "when Dad comes back, is he going to live here with us?" "Of course, honey. It's his home. But I don't know him anymore. What if we don't get along? What if we're not really a family anymore?" Her questions hurt me because they were the same questions I asked myself every night. How are we going to be a family again after 10 years apart? How was Ramon going to be a father again to 2 children who had grown up without him? How was I going to be the wife of a man who had lived alone for a decade? The call came in March of the 10th year. Ramon told me, in a voice that sounded strange, formal, as if he were reading from a piece of paper, "Carmen, it's time for me to come back." I've decided to return to Mexico. I waited to feel joy, excitement, relief. But what I felt was more like panic. After 10 years of living without him, the idea of him coming back terrified me almost as much as the idea of him not coming back. When? I asked. In 2 months. I'm sorting out my things here, selling what I have, finishing some work. Are you coming back for good? You're not going to go back? No, Carmen. This time I'm coming to stay. I hung up the phone and sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I had waited for so many calls for so many years. The children were at school, the house was quiet, and I sat there wondering if I was ready for my life to change completely again. For the next 2 months, I lived in a kind of emotional limbo. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, fixed things that had been broken for years, bought new sheets for our bed that had been mine alone for a decade. But no matter how much I prepared physically for his return, I couldn't prepare myself emotionally, because the truth was that I was no longer in love with the Ramon who had left 10 years ago. That man no longer existed. He had been replaced by a voice on the phone, by letters that came less and less frequently, by money transfers that had become more important than words of love. Ramon returned on a Tuesday in May, on a bus that arrived at 3 in the afternoon. I went to meet him at the terminal with the children, who were nervous and excited in different ways. Sophia had put on her prettiest dress and worn makeup for the first time in her life. Miguel kept asking if he would recognize his dad after so many years. When Ramon got off the bus, I almost didn't recognize him. He had aged more than 10 years would justify. His hair was gray, his face was more wrinkled, he had lost weight and muscle. But more than that, there was something different in his eyes, a hardness that hadn't been there when he left. The 4 of us hugged each other there at the terminal, surrounded by other families who were also reuniting after years of separation. But the hug felt strange, like hugging a distant relative you haven't seen in a long time. In the taxi on the way home, Ramon looked out the window as if he were seeing the town for the first time. Everything had changed during the 10 years he had been away. A new shopping center had been built, dirt roads had been paved, and murals had been painted on the walls of the town hall. Everything looks different, he said. And I didn't know if he was referring to the town or to us. The first few weeks of living together were awkward in ways none of us had anticipated. Ramon tried to resume his role as father and husband, but the children and I had developed our own routines, our own ways of making decisions, our own family dynamics. At the table, Ramon wanted to say grace as he had done before he left, but the children were no longer used to that tradition. He wanted to help Miguel with his math homework, but Miguel had learned new methods that Ramon didn't know. He wanted Sophia to tell him about her friends and her interests, but Sophia was a teenager who had learned to be reserved. With me, things were even more complicated. Ramon expected us to be intimate right away, as if the 10 years hadn't passed. But to me, he was practically a stranger. His body felt different. He smelled different. His hands were rougher. His way of speaking had changed subtly from all the years of speaking English. "Carmen?" he said to me one night, after 2 weeks of sleeping in the same bed, but not really touching each other. "I feel like you don't know me. I feel like you're not the same woman I left here 10 years ago either." "I'm not the same woman," I replied with more honesty than I had planned. 10 years change people, Ramon. I had to change to survive, to raise our children alone, to be independent. But you're still my wife. On paper, yes. But in reality, I haven't been your wife for years. I'm the mother of your children. I'm the woman who managed the money you sent. I'm the woman who waited. But wife, I don't know if I know how to be your wife again. That conversation opened a wound that neither of them knew how to heal. The confession. It was 3 months after his return when Ramon confessed to me the truth that I had suspected for years but never wanted to face. Carmen, he said one night after the children had gone to bed, I have to tell you something. From the way he said it, I knew it was something important, something that was going to change everything again. Tell me. During the years I was in the United States, I wasn't always alone. My heart stopped, but I also felt a strange sense of relief. Finally, the truth I had been waiting for years. Was there another woman? Yes, well, there were situations, moments of loneliness where I couldn't be faithful. How many times? Carmen, I don't think that matters. It matters to me. How many times? How many women? Ramon remained silent for several minutes, staring at his hands as if the answers were written there. They were casual situations, nothing serious. But there was one woman I was with for 2 years. 2 years. A 2-year relationship while I was here, waiting for him, raising his children, remaining faithful to a marriage that was no longer sacred to him. Did you love her? Not like I love you, but yes, I cared about her. Why did you come back then? Because you're my family. Because this is my real life. What I had there was survival. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed up until dawn, thinking about everything I had sacrificed for 10 years for a man who hadn't made the same sacrifices for me. I thought about all the nights I had gone to bed alone, all the times I had rejected other men because I was married, all the years I'd put my life on hold waiting for him to come back. The final decision. The next morning, Ramon got up and acted as if the previous night's conversation had never happened. He made coffee, helped the kids with breakfast, and put on his work clothes because he had gotten a job at a mechanic's shop in town. But I knew we couldn't keep pretending we were the same family we had been 10 years ago. Too many things had changed, too many wounds had been opened, too much trust had been lost. That afternoon, when Ramon came home from work, I asked him to sit down and talk. Ramon, I said, I think we both know this isn't working. Carmen, give me time. We can be a family again. Can we? You were unfaithful for years. The children no longer know you as their father. I no longer know you as my husband. Do you really think we can pretend nothing happened? We can't pretend, but we can start over. I can't start over with someone I no longer trust. Ramon remained silent, and in that silence, I understood that he also knew I was right. What do you propose? He finally asked me. I propose that we be honest, that we acknowledge that we are now very different people, that 10 years have changed us in ways we cannot undo. Are you asking for a divorce? I'm asking that we stop hurting each other by trying to be something we're no longer. The end of our story. Ramon and I officially separated 6 months after his return. It wasn't a divorce filled with hatred or resentment, but rather the sad recognition that some separations are final, even when the people involved still love each other. He moved into a small apartment near the workshop where he worked. The children visit him on weekends, and little by little they are building a new relationship with him. A father-child relationship that is not based on memories of when they were little, but on who they are now. I stayed in the house with the children, And for the first time in 20 years of my adult life, I am learning to live for myself. I am learning who I am when I am not someone's wife, when I am not waiting for someone, when I am not sacrificing my dreams for the dreams of others. Lessons learned. If I could talk to the 32-year-old woman who said goodbye to her husband at the airport 10 years ago, I would tell her that some separations are meant to be permanent. Not because people stop loving each other, but because circumstances change them in irreversible ways. I would tell her that it's okay to mourn what was lost, but that it's also okay to celebrate what was gained. Strength, independence, the ability to survive on her own. I would tell her that the children will be okay, that they are more resilient than she realizes, and that they will learn valuable lessons about life by watching their mother rebuild herself after loss. I would tell her that love isn't always enough, that sometimes the best decisions are the hardest ones, and that it's okay to let go of someone you love if keeping them close hurts both of you. But most of all, I would tell her that her life did not end the day her husband left for the United States, but that a new life began that she did not know she was capable of living. To all the women who are waiting, who are living in the limbo of temporary separation that has become permanent, I want to tell you that you are not alone, that your pain is real and valid, but so is your strength. I want to tell you that it's okay to set boundaries, that it's okay to say no more, that it's okay to choose yourself after years of choosing others, that you are not bad mothers for making difficult decisions, nor are you bad wives for recognizing when a marriage can no longer be saved. I want to tell you that you can start over, no matter how old you are, no matter how many years you have lost waiting, that you can build beautiful, full lives with or without the person who left. And I want to tell you that your stories, like mine, are important. That they deserve to be heard, that they deserve to be told, that they deserve to be honored. Because at the end of the day, we are more than the women who waited. We are the women who survived, who rebuilt themselves, who learned to fly with the wings we discovered we had all along. This is my story. Thank you for listening, D.